What's up guys, my name is Ivan Valdovinos, and on this channel I provide tips, tricks, advice, and strategies for your graduate school applications. So if you are new here, consider subscribing. In today's video, I am going to share with you the PhD application package that I submitted to 10 PhD programs that eventually got me into 5 with funding. The one that I'm going to share with you today is actually from the University of California, San Diego, where I am currently a second-year student, but I really submitted similar documents to the other 10 schools. So it's going to give you a little glimpse of what to expect and how to craft your competitive application package for a PhD program. So let's get started with the basic application. So on the application, this program asks me for application program selector. So pretty much just asking me to select which program I'm applying to, and that's pretty much it. The next section is the biographical information section. So this is really just your basic biographical information, your name, your birth date, your email, your contact information, your citizenship, ethnicity, etc. Then they also want to know about your residency and applicant data, which really just means that they want to know if you're a resident of California, because some programs, they don't pay out-of-state tuition, some do. My program in particular, this one, the UC San Diego one, they actually only pay out-of-state tuition for 1 year. And so your second year, third year, fourth, and fifth years, you have to become a California resident in order for them to pay for your tuition. So this pretty much tells them if I'm going to be a California resident before I start at UC San Diego, which obviously I'm not. So they asked me my residency status, federal ethnicity, University of California ethnicity, which is kind of interesting, first generation status, military status, and all this comes into play as well for fellowships that you might qualify for. They also ask you for your disability status, which means that, again, they probably have some specific fellowships or scholarships specifically for people with disabilities, so they ask you this as well. They also ask about your high school information, which obviously I put my high school information, graduation date, city location, etc. They also want to know if you were part of the California Community College system, which I wasn't because I'm not a resident of California, but again, this is for fellowship qualification. Then they also make you put your academic history, so which colleges, universities have you attended prior to applying to UC San Diego. So they ask you about previous graduate degrees. So for me, I put the Harvard Graduate School of Education. They ask you for date of attendance, location, degree, major, that's it. They don't even ask you for GPA. Then they also ask you for your bachelor's degree information. So for me, I put 2. So I put Washington State University because I got 2 degrees. So I got a Bachelor of Arts in Foreign Languages and Cultures. This one, they did ask you for your GPA, which I put a 3.49 out of 4.0. And this is all self-reported. But they do ask you for your transcripts too. Then I also put another bachelor degree, which the only change was the major. So I put English, concentration, secondary education, again 3.49 out of 4.0, again self-reported. So they do ask you, aside from for you putting this on your CV and resume, they do ask you to fill this out on the actual application. Then they also ask if you ever had a disciplinary violation. So if you ever were penalized in your undergrad or master's program in terms of, I don't know, dishonesty with your academic performance. And obviously I put no on mine. Then they also ask you for additional educational experience. So this, for me, this one pretty much means that this specific program wanted us to fill out up to 8 different sections because this was our fellowship, our external fellowship application. So what that means is that UC San Diego Graduate Division has specific fellowships for every graduate student that applies. And so this is your application here. So I filled out all 8. So I recommend that if they give you an option of submitting, this one said minimum 3, maximum 8, try to fill out as much as possible. I filled out all 8. And pretty much they were just short essay responses to different questions. Then they also have this other section which asks you about sponsoring organizations. So are you going to get external funding from a sponsoring organization or nonprofit or community organization, whatever it is? I put none for mine. They also ask you if you were part of graduate preparation programs, which I was part of the Institute for the Recruitment of Teachers, and then I was also part of the Ronald D. McNair Achievement Program, and as well as the College Assistance Migrant Program. And so all these programs helped me maybe get some credibility in terms of my knowledge and potentially get a second look on my application. I'm not sure, but they do ask you about this, and some of these questions are relevant for fellowship qualification again. Then they also asked you how did you learn about UCSD, and then they also asked you, which I think is interesting, what other institutions are you applying to? So I put that I was applying to University of Washington, University of Arizona, University of Texas, and Harvard University. I'm not sure if this holds any weight in terms of your acceptance. I believe it doesn't. They just want to know where you're applying to, if UCSD is your only choice or if you're applying elsewhere. They also ask you if you're applying for external fellowships, which I did, and I put that I was applying for the Ford Foundation Predoctoral Fellowship. And I think it's important for you as an applicant to show that you are committed to your education and to gaining funding, because if you are going to become a researcher, a professor, you're going to have to be applying for a lot of grants to support your work. And so by you applying for these fellowships early on, it's going to show the committee that you are committed to your work and your potential career. And so definitely apply for fellowships and put those when they ask you in your application. And then finally, they ask you about fee waiver applications, which I did ask for a fee waiver, and they have my information here for the fee waiver. They obviously also ask you about test scores. So for this program, they ask you for the GRE scores, and they ask you to submit the scores from the GRE website, which I did, but they also ask you to self-report your scores. So I submitted 2 sets of scores, one that I took in 2014, and then I took one in 2019, so that same application season year. So for the 2014, on the verbal section, I scored a 144, which was a 22nd percentile. The quantitative section, I scored a 143, the 13th percentile. And then analytical writing, I scored a 4.0, which was the 57th percentile. In 2019, I scored on the verbal a 140, 11th percentile, quantitative of 146, 23rd percentile, analytical writing 4.0, 57th percentile. So as you can tell, my GRE scores weren't that great. They were actually really low. They weren't even at average, at least for the verbal and quantitative. My analytical writing was a little bit above average, but still really low scores. But honestly, I wasn't worried about my GREs because I thought I had strengths in other parts of my application. And I wanted to show that I was a good writer with my GRE. So scoring at a 4.0 out of 6, I believe, was a good score that showcased my great writing skills. So for most PhD programs and even master's programs, they ask for 3 letters of recommendation. So I selected 3 different people. So I selected my former employer, my supervisor. I asked her to write me a letter of rec, and the reason why I chose her was because she saw my practical experience in education and higher education in particular, and she saw that I was producing results through my work. And because this program particularly does ask that you talk about your practical experience in your statement of purpose, I think that obviously I did that in my statement of purpose, but also by having a reference that can attest to my work is a good way to go about the letter of rec process. And so I asked her to talk about my practical experience in higher education, how I was transforming lives of our students, and I was producing results with our program. So she wrote one of my letters. I also asked one of my former undergraduate research advisors, and I asked them to write me a letter of rec to focus his letter on my research experience, my research skills, etc. So he wrote about that in my letter recommendation. Then I also asked my former supervisor and mentor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I had her write about my experience with her family engagement course because I was intending to do family engagement work in my PhD, and so she can attest to my work on family engagement and how I took her course that focused on family engagement, and that I produced this great this great proposal for a family engagement initiative, which I actually used as my writing sample for this PhD program, which I'll share later on in this video. But that's how I went about selecting the 3 people for my letter of recs. And the reason why I wanted to showcase different aspects of my skills, different aspects of my experience, different aspects of my life. And so I chose a former employer to showcase my practical experience. I chose a former research advisor and mentor to talk about my research experience. Then I chose a former advisor for my graduate school to showcase not only my specialty in family engagement, but also that I can complete graduate level work. Alright, so now let's talk about the writing sample. So this program asked me to submit a writing sample that showcased my best work, and that's really broad. So what should you be looking for when you submit something? So I want you to look at things that showcase your critical thinking skills, that showcase obviously your great writing, but also you want to make sure that you submit something that showcases your innovation. So what I submitted was a final that I had for the Graduate School of Education, the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I submitted a final focused on family engagement, where I built an action plan to improve Latino father engagement in secondary education. So I created this innovative solution to increasing Latino father engagement in secondary ed, specifically middle school. And so I submitted my 13-page document where I showcased a couple of things. So I had a literature review, brief literature review on here. So I showcased that I can create, that I can write literature reviews. Then I submitted, on this document, I also spoke about the gaps in the literature and how I was going to fix that through practical programming. And then at the end, I showcased my innovation, my ideas, which I talked about different ways in which you can involve Latino fathers in different aspects of the middle school, the K through 12 pipeline. And so I think that was great because it not only showed my advisor that I was passionate about Latino issues in education, but that I also had great ideas for innovation and how I would execute those ideas. So that's kind of how I went about selecting my writing sample. I honestly didn't even make any edits or changes because I thought it was good when I reread it, but also I got a lot of feedback from my advisor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, which I implemented prior to me even submitting this, which was a long time ago anyways. But I think it showcased a lot of my skill sets, not only in research, but also in how to write really clearly and also innovation. So now let's talk about the resume and CV. So I've shared a lot about this. I shared examples. I've shared my personal CV. So I want you to go check out that video, which I'll link somewhere up here. But I give you a synopsis. I literally go through my whole CV and tell you why I chose different things and how to improve yours. So go watch that video. But in brief, what I did was I wanted to make it clean and clear because these committee members are going to kind of sift through a lot of applications. So you want to make sure that you make things pop out. So I changed fonts. I was clear. I made things bold. I made things large. I just wanted to make it clean so they can easily get to what they want to read. I prioritized putting my research experience at the top versus my work experience first, because again, this is a research degree, so you want to showcase that you have that research experience. So I put those sections up front, that way they were right in your face right away versus them having to scroll through my whole 4-page CV to find my experience in research. So I put research experience first, then I put publications, conference presentations. All that entails a PhD student, what you should expect to do as a PhD candidate. So I wanted to showcase that I already had some experience with that, and so I put that right away at the beginning of my CV. Then I followed up with professional experience, where I spoke a lot about my higher education experience, and then after that I followed up with well, that's it actually. I cut some things out. So I wanted to showcase both my research experience and professional experience, and that's what I did. Alright, so the last thing that I want to talk about is the statement of purpose. Again, I do have a lot of videos on statement of purpose, and I actually share my statement of purpose with the University of California, San Diego. So go check that out in the cards up here. But in brief, what I wanted to do with the statement of purpose is I wanted it to be really focused on one topic. So I chose my potential dissertation topic, which was Latino males in higher education. So my first line here is, my career goal is to develop and direct a research institute and mentoring program that addresses concerns around equity and access for Latino males in education. So that's my thesis. So that's what I'm going to talk about throughout the whole statement of purpose. So at the beginning, I put down my career goal and how the program is going to help me get to that goal. Then I go on and talk about my experience as a low-income Mexican male in an education system in the United States, particularly in rural Washington state. So I talk about the discrepancies, the challenges that I faced as a rural Latino low-income Mexican male. After that, I talk about my research experience. So I talk about a project I did titled, what did I title this? It was about Latino males in higher education at the University of Arizona. And so I talked about how I already had some experience researching this population of students and what the outcomes and the implications were, but also what gaps in research I saw with my project. So after I talk about that experience of research, I talk about the gaps. I talk about how I discovered that Latino parents' voices and experiences weren't often left out of the literature. So that potentially my dissertation would be about Latino family engagement and how Latino family engagement could help out Latino male success in education. And so I talk about those gaps. Then I talk about how I would go about, executing this plan. So I talked about in-depth interviews and home visits. I talked about using different theoretical frameworks and so forth. Then at the end, I talked about why this program and why University of California, San Diego. So I talked about that I wanted to work with a particular faculty member. I talked about actually two of them. I talked about one that works in the practical space and then one that works in the program. And the one that works in the practical space, that person's actually an affiliate of a research program at the University of Texas called Project Males. So I made these connections related to my research dissertation, my potential research dissertation, and I wrote how UC San Diego faculty and resources are going to help me get to that point. Then at the end, I gave a little brief, short conclusion on how I needed to be at University of California, San Diego in order for me to achieve my goals. Alright, so that concludes my video on sharing my PhD application package that got me into 5 programs with funding. Like I mentioned earlier, this is focused on the University of California, San Diego, but I use similar documents for every program I apply to. I hope this was really helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them down below in the comment sections. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.